Hey everybody, Riot Mort here with Riot Kent, and after 4 long weeks, we are here with the patch 12.1 rundown, 12-point rundown, 12.1 rundown. And if you can't tell, I'm personally a little tired. We just got back to work today, had one day to lock in all the patch changes, get it done, get it in the game to get it shipped out to tomorrow. Because tomorrow, as soon as noon, OCE has this patch. It was a very brutal patch cycle for us to get everything in place. Kent, how you feeling about it?
Yeah, I'm tired. It was rough. I was up later last night because I knew I wouldn't be able to wake up that early today. But I still got up like way earlier than I would normally get up today to start working on this patch. But thankfully, like me and Mort have talked a couple times over the break, just like these are things we need to talk about, and then Mort put in a lot of time to kind of outline the problems and like the tactics he would go about solving them. So like we kind of went into today with a lot of information already, but still, it's like there is so much to do for this because it was a 4 week patch, and a lot needs to change basically to shift things into the right place. And we wanted to make sure we do our due diligence, but then again, we only have one like real work day before it goes out. So rough day, rough day.
Yep. All right. Enough excuses about our rough day. Let's talk about what you actually came here to watch. Let's talk about the changes. So let's just dive right in. You ready, Kent?
Yep, let's go.
All right. So 11.24, we shipped in the heart, crest, crown changes. That change was overall success. However, we felt like some of them were just kind of like off the mark a little bit here. So honestly, 4 weeks ago, we made some changes. Now, admittedly, some of these I don't think are perfect knowing what we know now, but because of the way localization works, we had to lock these in 4 weeks ago. So let me go over the changes here. Academy Heart now properly says it grants a Katarina. It was actually already doing that. There was just no text. Oops. Arcanist Heart now grants a Swain, so bit of a buff there. Challenger Heart now grants a Quinn instead of a Warwick. Protector Heart now grants nothing. This was back when Protectors were really strong early, so right now Protector Heart is nothing. Scholar Heart now grants a Zyra instead of Lysandra. Lysandra was very powerful, a little too powerful for a Heart. Scrap Heart now grants a Blitzcrank instead of an Echo. And Twin Shot Heart now grants a Graves. Any thoughts here, Kent?
Yeah, knowing what we know now about Protector, that one's more of like a scary change to me. But then again, the Protector reroll comp is still really powerful, and being able to like ramp that up to a high tier is still going to be really good. A lot of these other ones, we just wanted to make sure that when we initially did it, we didn't want to give the same champions throughout different hearts across the tiers. But now we're kind of like, it's probably okay to do this as long as the champion it grants makes sense, and so that's why a lot of these have been shifted and cycled around.
Yeah. Realistically, I don't think we quite have these perfect yet. We'll probably keep iterating on these for the next two patches, but again, at least overall the direction is good, and so one or two being off isn't the here.
Yep.
Cool. Same with crests. Some small adjustments here. Assassin Crest now grants a Talon, used to be an Echo. Arcanist Crest now grants a Swain instead of a Twisted Fate. Challenger Crest grants a Quinn instead of a Warwick. Chemtech Crest now grants a Warwick instead of a Zac. Imperial Crest now grants a Talon instead of a Swain. Mutant Crest now grants nothing. Mutant Crest is very powerful, very transformative, no longer gives a Kog'Maw. And Scrap Crest now grants a Blitzcrank instead of an Echo.
Yep. Yeah. Mutant Crest by itself is just really strong. Also, just one thing to call out on the last slide, actually, Twin Shot Heart grants a Kog'Maw now instead of a Graves. Saw the word Kog'Maw on this one, and Harrison Rinded. Yeah. So yeah, generally, like a lot of these are, up to about power of 2 cost. That's kind of what you get most of the time. Sometimes you'll get a 3 cost, depending on what the crest is. For example, like Scholar Crest still grants you a Heimerdinger. But for most of these, you're getting a roughly 2 gold from these augments.
Yeah, like I said, I expect more iterations in the future, but this was based off the information we had 4 weeks ago. So,
yep.
Okay, let's talk about some trait changes. So, Chemtech, right away, one of the bigger ones here. The damage reduction is the same across all levels, and that led to Chemtech 3 being, frankly, more powerful than it should have been this patch. So we're lowering the damage reduction across the board to 20%. But now, obviously, that makes 5, 7, and 9 Chemtech weaker than we'd want. So we're buffing the health regen of those 5, 7, and 9. And then also the attack speed of 7 and 9, because 9 in particular should be exciting. One of the harder, chase traits to hit. And so generally what you're seeing here is 3 Chemtech should feel worse than it did before. 5 should feel about the same, maybe a little worse. And then 7 and 9, this should be a buff overall.
Yeah, specifically the damage reduction was way too powerful on Chemtech 3. And in general, damage reduction is something we have to be really careful about just because of multiplicative tankiness. And so we wanted to make sure that came down, but didn't want to nerf the higher tiers.
All right, spicy change number 1. I'm going to call out the spicy ones. If I call it out as spicy, I'll be honest, they're a little risky, but probably good for the game. So,
yeah.
Spicy change number 1. Imperial. Imperial has basically been a dead trait for the most of this patch. It's pretty difficult to play. I've heard some small success cases here and there, but overall, you really have to high roll it. It's just way too hard to play. So we're going with a pretty big swing here. 3 Imperial gets buffed 5%. This should make, hopefully, Imperial Spatula a more attractive item. 3 Imperial should be a little bit stronger. And then 5 Imperial has just been like the deadest of dead traits of all time. So it's getting a massive buff where the Tyrant gets another 25% damage and 5% more to the rest of the team. So very large buff here to Imperial.
Yeah, if you can get an Imperial Spat, Imperial Emblem, and then have like dual rule, you have 2 units with doing 2.5 times damage without any other items, basically. So these numbers are like really, really high. It's still kind of like awkward to play, which is why we're like comfortable with having these high of numbers. But if you can make it work, if you find a path there and you make it work, the payoff should be worth it. And so that's why we're swinging pretty hard on this one.
All right, Innovator. Innovator 3 is in a good spot. It's still a very good opener, preserves your health really well. Innovator 7, if you can pull it off, quite powerful, very good. Not worried about that. Innovator 5 is this awkward middle child, though, and honestly, it's kind of the nerf to Innovator 7 because you have to play Innovator 5 for a while. Innovator 5 just really isn't cutting it, so we're buffing Innovator 5 up with the base HP and armor and MR, so the bear should be a little bit tankier. Innovator 5 should be a little bit healthier, allow you to get the 7 a little bit more often. So just a buffed Innovator 5 here.
Yep. The comp in general lacks frontline until you get to the later parts of the game. You could put in like a frontline Jace or play, a tankier socialite frontline if you reroll Tarek, something like that. So the Innovator 5 bears can just help your team stall out for a little longer.
All right. Spicy change number 2. Socialite has clearly been popular this patch. We're actually pretty fine with Socialite 3 and the amount of healing it provides. That's kind of intended. Socialite 1, we're also still pretty comfortable with. It's a 20% damage buff. That's what it's there for. But Socialite 2 is kind of shoring up the weakness of a lot of champions in a really unhealthy way. 5 mana per second is a lot of mana. You can run things like Victor with no mana items on a Socialite 2, and it's better than double Shojin. Socialite 2 was just ridiculously powerful, and obviously the one you have to talk about is Kaisa. Even on like Akali, it really doesn't matter. Even Gallios would end up like casting 3 or 4 times if you're putting them on the Socialite Hex. It's just too much. So we're going to nerf Socialite 2 pretty hard from 5 to 3 mana per second. This is a 40% nerf. It's a very large nerf. Throughout the rest of the patch notes, you're going to see some compensation buffs to some champions' mana to make up for this. But this is probably a very large change that will affect the meta a lot.
Yeah. The swing, we're swinging pretty large here, but 5 mana per second was just bonkers. There's just way too much mana. And even at 3 mana per second, that's like Scholar 2, slightly better. So it's like you're granting your main unit, the one you care about the most, still a lot of mana. And we're comfortable with this, the number of, and where it's at. We think that this is where it should be, where we gave compensation to the units. We gave compensation to the units to hopefully, balance them out a little bit more so that they're not as reliant on it. But of course, with the big swing like this, where we know that there might be some more units that might need compensation later down the line.
All right, Syndicate 7. We're buffing this up a little bit back to its 50% increase in power. Syndicate 7 just doesn't really feel worth the payoff. What's really funny is this looks like a massive buff, but Kent, what's the actual number here?
Goes from 80 to 90. Yeah, armor and MR. You also get 3% more Omnivamp.
Ooh, so plus 10 armor and MR and plus 3% Omnivamp. That's the actual impact here. So want to be clear that while this might look scary, it's not that scary. It's a buff to Syndicate 7.
Yeah, it just differentiates it from 5 more, and it makes it a bigger spike when you actually hit. Like, that 10 MR is actually, it's like a good amount. It's just nothing as massive as it looks here, which looks like a 17% increase in power, so.
All right, Yordle. So Yordle openers have been very powerful this patch. People use them to farm a lot of extra gold. To be honest, that's still going to happen. This isn't a massive nerf to that strategy. I fully expect that to still be a viable strategy, but we are lowering the high rolls a little bit here. So the odds of hitting a 2 cost and 3 cost are going down, so you're not going to see as many double Vexheimers as you've seen before. That being said, some of you might perceive this as a buff if you play sock style. Get your early Poppy 3, Ziggs 3, and then get 2 and 3 costs from there. That might be more of a valid option now. But anyway, as you see here, generally less 2 and 3 costs early on. The other big change here is that 6 Yordle continues to be a thing that it's good when it's good, but it's really hard to be good. You have to high roll pretty heavily. You have to have the right items and positioning. So we are buffing 6 Yordle a bit. If you're willing to play 6 Yordle, the champs will cast a little bit more frequently. This is good for like Lulu, Poppy, Heimerdinger, you name it. They'll just, even Tristana will get more casts. So it should be a bit of a buff to the 6 Yordle comp.
Yeah, and with the spawn odd changes, it's generally, you can look at it as like a 3 Yordle as an econ generation nerf, and then 6 Yordle as a, vertical comp buff, because it's better in both terms of like maintaining your tempo, hitting your or 1 cost 3 stars early on, but also helping you with bench management, and that aspect of managing Yordles or playing Yordles.
Yep, agree. Cool. All right, on the champion side, some big swings here. Swain continues to not really be this exciting champion, and since you need him to play an Imperial, we're going to buff him up a little bit. Just 5 mana off so that he can cast a little more often, and some more healing so that if you were willing to put like items on this guy, maybe make him a Swain 3 with some items, he might actually be able to tank and heal a little bit more often.
Yeah, with Swain and some of the other like small changes that you'll see later on, we're trying to make it so that some of these champions that you don't usually aren't excited about itemizing, even as like a secondary carry, secondary tank, can be the unit that you want to put some items on them, and it's exciting, and you feel happy about the payoff there from putting items on them. So,
all right, spicy change number 3. Heimerdinger range, we are upping from 3 to 4. This is a massive buff to Heimerdinger. Real talk, it might be a little too massive. We'll see. But we're doing this intentionally to give both Yordle and Scholar a little bit more of a premier carry in the mid game. You should be excited to get this guy and put a blue buff on him and maybe a jeweled gauntlet or a death cap or something. And he should be scary. He's supposed to be one of our premier 3-cost AP carries. And unfortunately on live, he was just too risky. He would walk up, he would put himself in danger, he'd get hit with CC, and he just ended up not being worth the risk. So frankly, we're just going to make it easier to play this champion. It will make him a lot better. So I fully expect Heimerdinger to be very meta this.
Yeah, with 4 range, you can position a lot better to avoid CC. You can, even if he has to walk up for some reason, he doesn't have to walk as far into danger into the middle of the center of the map, those kinds of things. And so he'll be more reliable as a carry and therefore more enticing to play as a carry.
All right, Malzahar, my boy. He stabilizes you a little too hard at 1 star. You just find a Malzahar at 2-1, 2-2, throw that in, and he just pumps out the damage. Kind of an uncomfortable amount, so we're lowering the 1 star. That being said, if you get a 3-star Malzahar, it just hasn't been rewarding enough. So we are buffing 3-star. This number looks a little scary, but Malzahar does have this weakness that he is still front to back. He's got to get through, that frontline Dragon Claw, Bramble champion before he can actually dot the backline. If this ends up out of control, you can definitely blame me. I'm the one who put the number in here, so blame me on this one. But generally, Malzahar 1 won't stabilize you as much, and Malzahar 3 should be a little more rewarding.
Classic Mort buffing his favorite champion.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I nerfed it too, so.
Yeah. No, but when you hit Malzahar 3, you're going to be facing some really beefy front lines. And so if you get stuck on that Dragon's Claw, that unit feels so like extreme in that, you don't really get to do much. And so it needed a little bit of love here to like push it over as like a viable late game carry. So yeah.
Cool. Seraphine. Seraphine is meant to be one of our 4-cost carries. You know, she's someone you want to put items on. She's kind of getting double compensated here because we'll talk about a Morello nerf later. She was one of the premier Morello users. So to compensate, she's getting some spell damage back. In addition, her trait, Socialite, got hit pretty hard, so she's not going to be as desirable. So we're also giving her some mana back. So we want Seraphine to be an exciting, desirable champion. Her traits and some other power got lowered, compensating her back so that she still stays desirable.
Yep. Yeah, just compensation buffs for our girl Sarah.
Cool. And then spicy change number 4, Urgot. Urgot has been the best 4-cost carry by a country mile. But the dirty secret is this champion was really only really good with Hurricane and Static Shiv. If you looked at all the data, every top performing version had some combinations of those items. One of his best builds was Hurricane Last Whisper. You know, like pretty silly. So kind of a big nerf here to those builds because now instead of every second shot during his ult counting as a auto, it's every third attack, meaning he's going to be firing, 33% less Hurricane bolts, 33% less static shivs. So that's a bit of a nerf to those builds. If you have a IE Last Whisper Deathblade Urgot, nothing changed. But the premier Hurricane build, we're lowering his ceiling a bit here.
Yeah, specifically, we're just, as Mort mentioned, we're targeting his ceiling. So we just want to bring down the very top of Urgot, which was out of line, where, his standard builds were not at his ceiling. He felt more correct power level. He had a correct power level for his cost. And just as a reminder, like Urgot 1 fires 5 times a second, Urgot 2 fires 7 times a second. And so every third shot means that Urgot 2 will fire, for example, 2 Hurricane bolts per second with his ult going on. So it'll still be a lot of bolts, and he'll still be good with these items. He's not going to be as good as he was before.
Great. All right, 5 costs. Galio continues to be a very powerful champion. We're kind of happy with him, to be honest. Galio 1 is a little weak, though, so we're going to buff the stun duration, the base stun duration of Galio 1 just a bit to try to tempt you into playing that Galio 1. Galio 2, though, just fine. Everyone's happy with their Galio 2s. That being said, though, for a giant CC tank that he is still outputting too much damage. We're not, he's even just like a tanky version of Galio is outputting more damage than we're comfortable with. So we are lowering the slam bonus damage here.
Yeah, Clapio won't be dead, but Clapio will be less good. And so this guy does so much damage.
Yeah. All right, now, despite what I said on stream about giving Kai'Sa starting with full mana and built-in Morello, that is not the direction we ended up going, and to no one's surprise here, I think Kai'Sa is getting some nerfs. Now, we already talked about Socialite getting hit, Socialite 2. You'll see later Morello gets hit and a few other things. So these Kai'Sa nerfs are actually relatively light, but it's just a little bit of a nudge in a few different spots. So first off, she lost a little bit of base HP, so that if she does take damage and get caught, she can be killed a little easier. We lowered her starting mana, so her first cast is delayed by about a second or two. So you don't quite get that early Morello application that you got before. And her base damage has gone down a bit, meaning she'll need maybe one more cast before she can really wipe the board. Honestly, I still think in the right circumstances, Kai'Sa will be good. I just don't think she's going to be a plug-and-play instant in every comp that she's been in the last patch.
Yeah, specifically, like, Kai'Sa has been strong in most scenarios, but specifically in the Socialite, giving her mana, the Colossus is being super tanky, her having Morello, that perfect scenario. She was way too strong, especially at 1-star. And so that's the one scenario that we hit in a lot of different directions. And then we still hit Kai'Sa, just smaller nerfs, but just overall to her numbers. She's still going to be playable, just not going to be as forcible. And, with a 1-star Kai'Sa shouldn't be winning you all the rounds in stage 5.
All right, why don't you talk about Tahm Kench?
Yes. So damage reduction is something that we talked about a lot. It's a stat that we typically don't let go over 30%. Sometimes we even limit it to about 25%. But at 40% damage reduction and the right, feeding Tahm Kench the right things or giving him the right items, he became really, really tanky, especially with some healing. And it almost felt like you could never kill him. So we're tuning down this damage reduction, and we're okay with the amount of damage he puts out. He's exciting. You can ramp him up, and eventually he'll farm you items, and it'll be a lot of fun. But he's just way too tanky while doing that. So we're tuning down damage reduction. And plus, when you hit 3-star Tahm Kench, a lot of these 3-star 5 costs, they like wipe the board completely. But Tahm Kench doesn't have the chance to do that because he has to 1-by-1 chomp through people, and he doesn't get damage reduction because he instantly kills whatever he hits. So now you can make a gigantic Tahm Kench by feeding it units. So now whenever you feed a Tahm Kench, it'll gain 20 times the usual stats. So as an example, if you feed a 2-star Mundo, Tahm Kench will gain 12,000 health.
Yeah, I was gonna say in our double up game that I'll be posting a little later, I fed a 3-star Mundo to Tahm Kench and got 5,400 HP. So if that Tahm Kench had been a 3-star, we would have gotten what, 120,000 HP, give or take.
Yep, you don't even see the notches anymore in the health bar. It'll be that.
So
and I played around with this like during testing, and I forced some stuff, fed it to him, and he can get some wild numbers if you hit him early enough. It just hitting a Tahm Kench 3 early enough isn't really a thing. So
yeah, this will definitely be fun though, and I look forward to the YouTube videos of the 600,000 health Tahm Kenches running around. So
yep,
should be fun. Cool. On to items. All right, Guardian Angel. This is the most built item in the game for good reason. You can put it on anyone, and it's usually generally good. It's probably the best defensive item on champions. A little too good. So we are going to nerf it a bit here. Long term, we'll see what we do with Guardian Angel, but for now, it needs a nerf. It needs to not be a must build on every champion. So we are nerfing the HP you come back to from 250%. Now, for some champions, this may not matter, right? Like an Akali, this might be fine. She might just heal right back up, no problem. For other champions, like say Jhin, maybe it matters more, and maybe now this isn't the best item choice. So we'll have to see, but this is definitely a nerf to Guardian Angel.
Yeah, and looking at this, it looks like a really big number nerf. But a lot of the power in Guardian Angel actually comes from the aggro drop, and then you get to come back and heal up. And so that part of the item isn't touched. And a lot of these items, from set to set, we need to balance based on the users and however the traits and however the set shifts basically. And Guardian Angel is an item that we haven't really touched. And so this set, there's a lot of good Guardian Angel users, and the item is super high value, and so it doesn't necessarily need to have as good of it doesn't need to be as strong as it used to have been in the past, basically. And there's also a lot of healing on these units, so it just gives a smaller window for them to be able to heal back up once they revive.
All right, Morello and Sunfire. I think it's been no secret that Morello has been one of the dominant items patch. It's the second most built item, if that wasn't clear. Whether it be on Kai'Sa, Echo, Lissandra, Twisted Fate, you name it, provides just way too much damage and utility. We want it to be there for the utility. We want you to use it as prevent their enemy healing, so we're not nerfing that. But we are going to nerf the true damage burn 20%. So you're going to do 20% less damage with your Morello and Sunfire. Now for Morello, great. The item's nerfed. Honestly, it's still going to be a good item, but it's going to be nerfed. Cool. For Sunfire, though, we didn't want to just nerf the item, even though the item is still quite good. So we are letting it proc more often. So you'll be able to apply more burns to people. So should still be quite good early. But this is to keep Sunfire about power neutral, whereas Morello should be nerfed, again, 20%. It's a pretty big nerf.
Yeah, and this actually also helps Sunfire Cape a little bit later in the game because you have faster fights, and whoever has the Sunfire Cape will be able to spread the burn a little faster.
Yep. RFC, we like this item, but generally just hasn't been super appealing. We still want this to be like the good upfront attack speed item, so we're just giving it another 10% attack speed.
Yep, build this if you want a lot of attack speed.
And then finally, Zerat. Zerat's another, I think, underappreciated item. Early game, it's actually insanely good. If you build the stage 2, you'll probably win streak with it. It's really good. But it falls off way too quickly. And so we're upping the scaling of the HP quite a bit so that it shouldn't fall off quite as hard in the late game. So you can see here, like stage 5 now, it went from, gained another 250 HP. Should be a little bit more attractive an option. My honest opinion is I don't think a bunch of you are going to change and start building Zerat portals. But hopefully if you get it, like, say, out of an item grab bag or something, you won't feel quite as bad about it.
Yeah, and this is not us trying to make it super good in the late game either. This is just more of, this is still flat HP. It's still something that's stronger early than it will be later. And we're okay with that. It's just going to be less bad as this game goes on. And we want to make sure that, if at any point you have to build this or you decide to build this because you want the taunt, for example, you feel better about it.
All right. On to augments. Why don't you do the augments, Cam?
Yeah, Stand United is something that is really strong this patch. We're almost reverting it back to its previous numbers of 2, 3, 4. If you watch the post-mortem, we talked about how, math-wise, it came out to be like not that much of a DPS increase, but it ended up being, it's actually really strong because of how much both stats benefit a lot of the units. So we're nerfing Stand United 1 and 2 just because those provide so much value for the tier that they're at. But looking at the data, Stand United 3 is actually at an acceptable place and where we are happy with it. And you kind of still have to play around it. It's not exactly something that you just like pick up and it's free power. And so that's why we're reverting to Stand United 1 and 2 and keeping 3 at the buff number. Makeshift armor. This is one that's you take it sometimes, but you're never that excited to take it. We want to make it feel better when you take it, and actually are buffing it a decent amount especially at 3. So the armor goes from 30, 45, 60 to at tiers 1, 2, and 3 to 35, 55, 75.
Yeah, I think makeshift armor in particular is one that will never be truly as exciting as other augments because nobody really wants to get a buff for their unitemized champions. They want to get buffs for their itemized champions. So that's always going to make it a hard sell. But especially in certain comps, like, say, Innovator, or, comps where you've got a lot of champions, maybe like Bruisers, getting that effective health can be very, very valuable here. So hopefully this at least has some attractive outs.
Yeah, and especially some of the augment combos. For example, if you get like the training dummies, phony frontline, you'll be excited to take something like this. Okay, Ardent Sensor. Ardent Sensor is an augment that we've seen struggle for a while. It's not picked that often, but it is an exciting augment to take because of how much ramping power you can get in a fight. But it's not powerful enough, and so we want to make it not only more exciting but also more powerful. And so we're buffing the attack speed of every cast from 40% to 50%.
Whew, it's gonna be spicy.
Yep, big buffs. Big buffs.
Cool.
Ascension. There's no surprise that Ascension is one of the strongest augments out there. After we made it more common, players have been seeing the power of this, taking it a lot, and using it to great success. So we're nerfing the bonus damage from 65% to 50%. In general, these kinds of like generic power augments need to be weaker than the more specific or hard to play around augments. So Ascension was too powerful for being something that's like super easy to use.
Yeah, this became the most picked augment of the patch for sure. Yep. And like I said, this might be an over nerf, but realistically, for something being picked that much, it needs to be over nerfed. The generic, like Kent said, the generic ones should not be the premier ones. It should be more the specific ones.
Yeah, when playing, seeing how fast people pick Ascension, it was wild this patch. Yeah.
All right, page.
All right, next page. Duet. So we buffed Duet in the previous patch to grant bonus HP to both of the units that are in the 2 spotlights. Ended up being really good. People really liked it. It ended up shooting up in the data also. But it went up a little bit too much. It's a lot stronger than we had intended to be, even considering that we're going to be nerfing Socialite too. It's still granting too much HP for being a tier 1 augment. And so we're nerfing the bonus HP that the Socialite, the units in the spotlights get from 500 to 400.
Yeah, this one was great because before it had the HP buff, it was literally the worst augment in the game.
Yep.
And then we buffed it up, and now it's like top 15. It's good. It's really good. It's just a little too good So now we get to finally fine tune it. And maybe the right answer is 450, 400. We'll see. But this gets it closer to a more balanced state.
Yep. Spellblade. So Spellblade landed. Spellblade got reworked last patch to deal percentage of your AP every time an Arcanist casts. It seemed to land pretty well. There's fun builds out there, and you can play it in a very specific way. But it's not. It's like the augment is doing okay, but it could be stronger. And so we're buffing it from 200% to 225% AP on hit. It's a harder augment to play around, and so because it's more specific, it can afford to have more power.
So I'm calling it now, even though this one looks fine. I'm calling this a spicy change. I think this
Okay.
is one of the underexplored augments that a lot of people don't know how to play. And what's going to happen is now that we buffed it, people are going to be more willing to try it. They're going to figure out how it works. They're going to figure out how good it is, and we're going to see some Spellblade comps emerge. That's my offshoot prediction. Match.
All right. The people are we're gonna watch Soju play it once. Is this broken? And
Yep,
everyone's
yep.
gonna be
That's gonna
so.
spread, and next thing you know, it'll be who balanced this augment.
Yeah. Who balances this game? Do they even play this game?
Nope.
All right, Sunfire board. This one is bringing Sunfire board in line with Morello and Sunfire, the new burn values. We're bringing everything down from 2.5% to 2%. You still get to have the power in the grievous wounds or the healing reduction, but the overall true damage is burn damage is coming down by 20%.
Cool.
And Woodland Charm. So Woodland Charm is actually doing pretty well as an augment, but a lot of times, especially if it shows up later in the game as a prismatic augment, it's not. You see the 1500 HP, and you're like, this isn't enough for me to create enough frontline. And we think you can afford to have a little bit more power too, especially as a prismatic augment. Now that it is a prismatic augment, so we're buffing the HP of the clone from 1500 to 6.
Yeah, this is another one. To me, this feels like one of those placebo buffs where, like, I don't think 100 HP is going to make or break this, but this might get more people to try it. This augment at 1-4 is like a free win streak. It's better than new recruit. It's so much value. Late game, you can get like a second scion. You can do some pretty crazy stuff with this. It does fall off a little bit in the late game, but like if you want a top 4, this is one of the best augments out there. So I think this is a buff to try to get people to use it more than it needs it, but we'll see.
Yep.
Cool. All right, now on to the small changes. As always, the difference between a small and a large change is that the large changes we expect to affect the meta, whereas the small changes, like, honestly, you may not notice, and that's okay. So, on the trait side, there's only one, and it's specifically the Metamorphosis version of Mutant. Metamorphosis has been through quite the journey. If you remember back when we launched, and even the second patch, like, this was the most OP version of Mutant. Everyone was like, if you get this, everyone forces Mutant, you win the game. It's ridiculously OP. And everyone was like, you've got to nerf the defensives. You've got to nerf the defensives. We were stubborn, and we didn't nerf the defenses. We just pulled out the AD and AP. Well, it turns out we were right on this one, because once the AD and AP got low enough, this became the worst version of Mutant, and now nobody plays it. Now that we know this, we can start to work our way back to try to get it to be playable and exciting. So we're just going real small here. Another +1, +2 AD and AP. But hopefully Metamorphosis now won't be the thing that you look at and go, well, now I'm not playing Mutant. So hopefully Metamorphosis feels a little better.
Yeah, especially at Mutant 5. The 480 and AP actually end up stacking up to a decent amount of power, so should be more enticing to play.
All right, as is small changes, I'm going to burst through them quick.
Yep.
Caitlyn 3, just doing a little bit too much damage. We're nerfing that just a tiny bit. Admittedly, this was one of those changes made 4 weeks ago. I think she's kind of fallen off. But it's still good that Caitlyn 1. Caitlyn 3-star doesn't really need to, like, one-shot Braum 2s with tank items, So
Yeah.
should be fine there. Garen, we finally got him to the point where he's not like this ridiculous super tank that casts 100 times. But now he's kind of like the worst champ in the game, so we're trying to give him some power back. So we're just going to give him 10 AD. Should allow him to do a little bit more damage without putting him back into his, like, unhealthy state. Graves is a champion that, like, no one's ever really excited to get, like, an early Graves. Like, it's fine, but you don't really get excited about it. So we're just buffing him a little. Although you could argue it's a bit of a nerf. That's why it's white here. He does cast one auto later at the start of the fight, but he's now more likely to get a second cast. And so if you're willing to itemize him, you might actually get 2 or even 3 casts, giving you a lot of CC for your team. And remember, his spell does a decent chunk of damage. So you could even do something crazy like use him as an IE Jeweled Gauntlet item holder for Lux and do some surprising amounts of damage. And then finally, Alawi. Not that mercenaries need a ton of love, but Alawi has always felt this like she just kind of exists. She's not great. Nobody ever is excited to 3-star her. So we're buffing up her spell damage a little, especially at 3-star. And at 3-star, she gets that extra healing so that she might actually be able to tank and do some pretty cool stuff at 3.
Yeah, the one call out here I have is for Garen. So Garen's a unit that kind of has a damagey profile, mixed between tank and damage. But Garen's percentage HP damage part of his spell was always kind of gross with certain itemizations. Like with Warmogs, he became, just melting the backline in literally one cast. So we're giving him back damage and AD so that his auto attack is slightly harder, but his spell also gets to scale off of this AD and do more damage without doing the unhealthy portion of damage that came from the HP scaling.
Continuing on with one cost, Kassadin. In another effort to reduce the DR, we really don't want the Kassadin Kog'Maw reroll comp to become the dominant comp, so we're just edging it down a tiny bit. In this case, what we're doing is we're lowering his total DR, so he won't be quite as resistant to all forms of damage, but he does get compensated by it lasting a little longer. And so he'll be able to tank a little longer. Overall, it should only be a tiny bit of a nerf. And then Twisted Fate, you see here is a bit of a spell damage buff. This is a tiny bit, we wanted to buff him a little, but then a little bit more, it's the Morello compensation, because TF with blue buff Morello was actually pretty damn insane. With Morello being nerfed, we wanted to give him a little bit of power back so that TF is still a playable one cost.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, 2 costs. Kog'Maw, I think we've talked about this in previous patch rundowns and postmortems, but we went from 6, 8, 10 or 6, 7, 10 to 7, 8, 9. And I said at the time, I'm pretty sure the number is 8, 8, 8. Turns out, yeah, Cog 1 still a little weak. Cog 2 seems fine. Cog 3 still a little strong. So sure enough, we're going to that 8, 8, 8. He still gains extra AD every time he levels up, so leveling him up is still good. But he doesn't need to be quite melting tanks as freely as he is now. Talon, another buff to Imperial, trying to get Imperial more playable state. Plus, no one's ever really excited to itemize a Talon. I do think this will push Talon into the one of, if not the best early game champions, but that's okay for a 2 cost. He's still a single target slow bleed killer, so he's not gonna own the late game, but this should make him a little bit better. And then finally Zillion for the Time Master to only slow for 3 seconds felt thematically wrong. Plus, again, no one's really excited to have a Zillion in their comp. He's just kind of a trait bot. You use him for Clockwork, you use him for Innovator, that's it. So we're giving him 1 extra second on his spell slow duration.
Yep. For the Kog'Maw nerf and the Kassadin nerf on the last page, we're targeting this comp that is still pretty good, and even pretty good on this patch, and next patch we're bringing down a lot of the top contenders, and so this is one of the things where we want to preemptively hit them so that they don't become the next dominant comp in the patch. And just looking at the data, they are already really strong, and so this is just tuning here for these 2 champions where we're not hitting them too hard, but we want to make sure to bring them down a little bit.
Cool. On the 3 cost side, Echo and Lysandra are both getting a small damage buff. Should be pretty obvious. They're Morello compensation. That's it. While we are nerfing Morello, we don't want Echo and Lysandra being worse, so they get a little bit of love back. That's it. Samira gets a little bit of HP. She's already getting more damage via the Imperial change, so she doesn't really need more damage, but we just wanted her to not quite be the fragile flower, and instead be the awesome desert flower she's supposed to be. And then finally, Vex. Vex is underperforming just a little bit here. Arcanists really need their premier tank. Same with Yordles. So if you get an early Vex 2, you should be excited to itemize it. So just a little bit more HP.
Yeah, and just want to call it out before someone else says it, but Imperials were buffing Swain, Samira, Imperials, and Talon. We're aware that we're buffing all of these units. We considered it an Imperial package. We think this is necessary to push Imperials into a competitive spot in the meta.
Yep. Because they're certainly not now.
Yep.
All right, 4 cost side. Orianna, slight buff. This is honestly a bit to buff her a little bit and a bit to compensate for the Socialite 2 nerf, in case you were using Socialite Oriana. Scion 1 is like the worst unit in the game. There's not a lot we can do about that, stuck behind our 1.8x multiplier. But until then, at least we can give him a little bit of extra stun duration and damage on his spell. Nothing crazy. And then Yone just being brought down a tiny bit. Very good damage. We're happy with his damage, but just not quite as tanky. So you might want to put a better defensive item on him to keep him alive. So.
Yeah, nothing to add on this one.
And then finally, Victor. He's another one who's getting some benefit from the Socialite 2. So Socialite 2 got nerfed. Victor used that a lot. So Victor's mana cost is being lowered. The hope here is that something like 2 Scholar, 4 Scholar Victor with Shojin should still be viable. If we have to go further next patch, fine, but didn't want to overkill it. So
yeah, small compensations. Didn't want to swing too hard.
Item side, Chalice. Chalice is in a really awkward spot because there's so much AP in all the traits across the board. So we're just buffing up the item a little bit so that if you end up with a Chalice, you don't feel quite as bad. You can use it for some creative stuff. My personal favorite is like you have an IE Jeweled Gauntlet, blue buff Malzahar with 5 mutant and mana reduction. So he has no AP, so a Chalice actually isn't bad there. But something like that to make Chalice just a little bit more attractive. Static Shiv has actually been a premier item. It looks really good in the data. People finally figured out how good it is. So we're just lowering its base attack speed a tiny bit. Still be a very good item doing just as much damage with that 50% MR shred. And then finally, of the Ornn augments, Death's Defiance got a new benefit where it now grants 20% Omnivamp. So now not only does it prevent you from dying, but it can also keep you alive. This could make it very good on someone like, say, Yone or Fiora, who does a ton of damage. So should be a cool option.
Yeah, and this is actually a pretty big change, but it's in the small section because it's one item within one specific augment that's being changed. So Death's Defiance now gets to be a little bit more interesting, hopefully more exciting for you to take when you see it come up, and you're not only excited for it by a couple of those Ornn augments.
Cool. On the augment side, only one buff. Shrug It Off. Hilariously enough, there was that whole Reddit thread about how terrible Shrug It Off is and how you never take it, which is hilarious because in our data, it actually looks fine to good. So we're just going with a light buff to try to see if more people will want to take it here. Also, with Morello being nerfed, maybe it becomes better. But this should be a slight buff, so maybe you're willing to play some Bruiser or some Cho 3 with Shrug It Off.
Yeah. Kind of like a placebo buff, but also it's a decent amount of extra power. So yeah.
All right, and then lots of bug fixes. Eternal Winter no longer applies temporary VFX below the unit when frozen. Great. Fixed an issue with Garen with blue buff would stop gaining mana in rare situations. Cool. Frozen Heart generated by Scrap will now properly remove its attack speed slow when its holder dies. Sorry, Scrap Echo, you just got nerfed. Deal with it. Caitlyn and Fiora's ability will now properly cast when targeting an invulnerable unit, such as a Colossus with Armor Plating. No, this isn't fixing all of Fiora's fizzle situations, so don't think it is. It just fixes a couple. In Double Up, there will now always be a winning team visible during the victory sequence, even if all teams were reduced to 0 health. Cool. Players no longer continually take massive damage after surrendering. It's really funny to see. I saw that in a Double Up game, and someone had negative 8,000 health. Pretty funny.
Oh.
Seraphine's tooltip now specifies that she casts at the largest group of enemy units. Make it more clear. Jinx no longer incorrectly burns enemies for 2.5% of their max health instead of 2% at 1 star. Just a slight fix there. Jinx's tooltip now properly reflects the amount she burns, so it shows the proper number. It was always doing this though, so it's not really a change to Jace. And then finally in 1124, we intended to ship a Jace nerf where his armor, bonus armor and MR would go down from 40 to 30. But that never actually went through, it turns out. And we're pretty happy with the power level where he is. So basically, we're just undoing that nerf that never shipped, which means Jace is still the same. It's just that nerf never happened.
Yep.
There you go.
Yay, bug fixes.
Yeah. All right. That is a big patch for one day of work. Admittedly, there's, like I said, there's some spicy changes in there. We'll see. Should definitely be a different meta on the other side, though. I kind of doubt we're going to see the Morello Kaisa rush. So should be interesting at least to see what comes out on the other side of this.
I'm excited to see what people think. I'm sure I'm calling it now. People are gonna be calling Imperials OP because they're gonna see 4 Imperial buffs and be like, oh, this Riot company always buffs 4 things at once.
My again, I'm making some pretty bold assumptions here. I already made that one.
Right.
I'm gonna say Imperial still ends up being like C tier.
We'll see, Mort. We'll see. Yeah, but actually, though, I don't think this pushes Imperial over the edge or anything. It was like what was necessary to bring Imperial into like a playable state. So
Yep. So, all right. Like I said, this patch goes live on Wednesday, which is, I guess, if this video is going live on Tuesday, that means tomorrow for you guys. Although, if you're like OCE, it's like 4 hours from when this video went up. So depends on your region. But basically, within the next 24 hours, you'll be playing this patch. Be fun. I'm looking forward to it. So
yep.
yeah,
Same.
cool. All right.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, that's going to do it for us. Here's to a new year, new patches, 12.1 all the way down to 12.24. One down, 23 to go. Here we go. So, awesome.
That's how it works. Interesting.
Yeah,
Accounts. Yeah.
indeed. All right. Until next time, as always, take it easy.